Hello and good day. Welcome to the Super Good Camping Podcast. My name is Pamela.
I'm Tim.
And we are from supergoodcamping.com. We're on a mission to inspire other people to get outside and enjoy camping adventures such as we have as a family. Today's guests are two gentlemen from the lovely province of Manitoba and the state of Minnesota. We were introduced to them by Steve from Sulik 46. He got to meet them on a recent trip in the Northwest Territories and was blown away by some of their epic tripping. They've been canoe tripping together for about 16 years and have logged 5,600 kilometers together. Please welcome Jim Gallagher and Brian Johnston. Yay, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and having yak with us today.
Yeah. First question out of the gate is, how did you two manage to sort of get together and start tripping?
Well, I think Brian and I met at the Far North Symposium in Minneapolis. I think Brian came down for that. I forget if you were presenting or just coming down to see some presentations, and that was some time ago now. But
yeah, it might have been when I presented on the Dog River, going into Lake Superior.
Okay.
And there's two big symposiums. There's the wilderness one in Toronto and the one in Minneapolis.
So we met at the one in Minneapolis, and I've done some tripping, with some canoe trips with other people over the years, and Lee Sessions was a guy that I tripped with. We planned a number of trips with, and we needed another partner on a trip, and we recruited Brian, for the trip on the Mara and Burnside rivers, going back, 2009? 2009 for that trip in particular. And Brian and I paddled together on that trip, and it was so nice to paddle with somebody who had really exceptional whitewater skills. And, you learn things from the people you travel with. And on that trip, I certainly learned a lot, and sort of opened up the door to many more trips after that.
Yeah, and then from there we did some trips together as a group, but not paddling together. I paddled one trip or a couple trips with my old traveling partner that I had been traveling with, and it took until I think 2013, so another 4 years before Jim and I locked into a two-person team that we've been since.
That's amazing. 12 years then.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, over 5,600 kilometers, that's... I've been tripping for a while. I am nowhere near that, like nowhere.
So how did you each as individuals get into that kind of tripping?
Well, I started work in the Boundary Waters canoe area, just opposite of the Quetico, and I was a wilderness ranger in the Boundary Waters with the Forest Service. I did that for 5-6 years, and I moved on to other jobs in the Forest Service, but that was sort of the beginning of my interest in canoe tripping, and I didn't take my first Arctic trip until 1992, and that's where the real learning began. So the first Arctic trip, sort of the scales fell away from my eyes, and realized there was this whole region of North America that was just wild, and the rivers were challenging, and it was real wilderness, compared to the Quetico Superior, which is wilderness, but boy, the far north is something else.
Next level.
Yeah, our route in was different, but the one similarity is Jim and I both ended up in the Arctic, independently, but also what we would consider kind of late in life, like we missed a whole bunch of years of good paddling opportunities up there. But in Manitoba, I found out very quickly that if you like outdoorsy stuff, I was a young adult, that summers are hot, and the best place to be in hot weather is on the water. So I kind of migrated a little bit through Boy Scouts, but to do canoe trips instead of, say, like hiking. I was a bit of a long distance cycler, but again, being on the water was just a very comfortable place to be in the summer. And then like Jim, I migrated. I followed other people through the local canoe club that were going farther north, chasing all the rivers up the east side of Lake Winnipeg, and then eventually into the Barren Lands. And once you get up there, for some people like Jim and I, there's no going back. The north just opens up such a vast opportunity, and it's so good for paddling. We're never going to achieve what we'd like to achieve up there.
Well, that's great. I mean, you're always aiming for more, for something else. So that's cool. I feel like if 20 years ago, I might have been able to take a shot at that, but I wasn't. I was busy doing my other things. Now, not a chance. I'm also way too broken to even think about it. Which I literally this year, the beginning of this year is the first time our eldest, and I did whitewater. We've never done it before. We're lake paddlers, like flat water, Algonquin, Killarney, but that sort of deal. We just got into whitewater, and what an amazing experience. Like, it's a totally different animal. It's very cool.
It is. Yeah. You realize how little you know about whitewater after doing all of that flat water paddling that I did. And, when you go, wind up on a river like the Thelon, my first trip, it's like you never knew how much you didn't know. There's this, cognitive bias of just not knowing how ignorant you are. And a big river like the Thelon will humble you very quickly. And it did for me. And, and I've been trying to learn ever since, how to be, a competent river paddler. And,
Yeah, I think the whitewater aspect of it just opened up more river opportunities in the north if you're willing to learn and deal with whitewater, whether that be from a lining perspective or a portaging perspective or a running whitewater perspective. But the north is so big and so great, you can find flatwater trips with no whitewater if you're willing to look outside of the classic, river trips that people do. There are certainly non-whitewater trips that are available.
Yeah. We have done, well, certainly, again, very limited experience with it, but portions of the tripping we did this past summer and into the fall, there was plenty of just regular river, like not whitewaters, just paddling, not unlike my flat water experience. But then we got into, some rocks and stuff like that, and some small falls and whatnot, and ignorant is a perfect word, because it was like, we spent a couple of weekends taking, lessons, and when you get into it, I don't have that muscle memory, so it became quite. I had to just sort of react to things, and thankfully everything worked out fine. We never unintentionally had water in the boats, so that was a good thing. But yeah, it's I can't even imagine like that. I want to think we were pretty low level sort of stuff, and water levels were fairly low. So thankfully it was a rental boat, because banging off of rocks is would not make me happy with my own boat. I wish I knew more about the northern rivers. Like, how do you put a trip like that together? Because I have to assume, when we're doing it here, we're only a couple hours away from civilization, whereas up, in the true north, you're days away. How does that all play out? Like, I assume you guys fly in or fly out, and then that's a lot of stuff you got to lug if you're going for any length of time. Like one of your trips was like 1,000 no
1,000 kilometers. Yeah,
yeah.
That was 2012 was 1,000 kilometers, and yeah, that one was a complex one. We had a resupply, we had a crew switch. It was a long trip, 6 weeks, over 40 days, and and I think that was a turning point for Brian and I of looking to have less complexity in that regard of, crew change and resupply. So all of our trips since then have been really just the two of us. We've had a couple other people on other trips. Or 2 years ago, another couple joined us, but they were self-sufficient. They planned their own, food, and we, got together with, for flights in and some of the logistics. But, really since 2013, it's just been Brian and I. We've been self-contained, self-outfitted, and it's complex. Some of the logistics are complex. This last trip was 4 flights just to get on the water, and an overnight in Edmonton, and overnights in Norman Wells. So it gets complex. Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so Steve was just unbelievable that Steve and I had the same idea for the same trip, and we were both looking to reduce the cost and share a plane. But it is complicated and complex, but you can do easier trips logistically.
Yeah.
But it's just like paddling down south. I'm sure you've done trips where you have to organize, car shuttles and all this kind of stuff, and how you're going to get in and how you're going to get out. And, paddlers often like those circle routes, or routes where you can come back to your vehicle, because it just makes things logistically simpler. But the going north is it's very similar to going north of the big cities in Ontario or Minnesota into the the paddling area. You have to worry about logistics and figure all that stuff, and we've been doing it long enough that it doesn't always seem that much more complicated. For us, you phone an airline and you get a plane ticket while you book online now, but that can be no harder than finding somebody to shuttle your vehicle if you're in Ontario for a paddling trip.
Yeah,
it must have been difficult the first few times, just because it's not something you normally deal with.
Yeah, and I'm much better personally at planning trips in the Arctic than I am planning trips anywhere else in the world, just because you get to know there's a limited number of outfitters and air charter companies and all that kind of stuff, and people often historically and still drive to Yellowknife every year, and some of them would just put in right on Great Slave Lake and paddle from there if you want to save the cost of doing an air charter, and they'll paddle from Great Slave Lake. If you have time, they'll go on a big month-long or 2-month trip and might even do a circle route and get back to their car.
Cool.
One thing both Brian and I have done is travel with other people that did a lot of the logistic planning for the trip. So we got to see how it was done without having to be saddled with it completely. So at least my first few trips, people were, doing that thinking, for me, and I got to see how it was done and begin to put the pieces together, after a few trips of, like Brian said, there's a limited number of air charter companies that you can work with. So, there's 1 or 2 in Yellowknife, there's 1 in Norman Wells, there's 1 in Cambridge Bay. There's just not a lot of choices in places.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing we do too for some places, we've done quite a few trips out of Baker Lake, and we would always have a backup plan when you land there, because if the only plane in town isn't flying for whatever reason, you need a backup plan. So we would always bring maps and figure out where could we do a trip out of Baker Lake where we end up back in Baker Lake without relying on an air charter. And that might involve a boat shuttle or even an overland drop off somewhere, or it might just involve us portaging or paddling right from the community. I think we have this. I think we have this concept of extending our life in the north by eventually shying away from maybe rivers and just fly into a place and just like Baker Lake or Yellowknife and just paddle on the big lake and take some time and just end up right back where you started, and logistically very, very simple.
Yeah, so when you say Arctic, I keep thinking cold. So how do you navigate that? Like, you don't want to have to be lugging tons and tons of clothing and gear and stuff with you.
Yeah, it's cold cold is not the issue. The issue is 3 seasons or 4 seasons during your limited time there in the summer.
Yeah, how quickly it changes, and I know that when Steve and Evan got back, Steve posted a very short video, and it was just like the amount of bugs. It's like, how do you even breathe, man? Like, there's just so many bugs. That's insane.
I didn't think the bugs were bad on the trip this summer, on the Brock and Roscoe rivers. I think I maybe used my head net once, maybe, and it was awfully. But we were very close to the Arctic Ocean there, so it was cool. It was cold at times. It was really cold at times too. July 12th, we had snow and ice. It was bad conditions. You don't worry about the bugs in that condition. You worry about staying warm, and which we did. But yeah, the bugs, to me, the past number of trips, Brian hasn't ever packed bug dope since I've known him, and I've scaled back my bug protection. I think we're just getting more tolerant. You just accept that's part of the Arctic. You're going to be uncomfortable in some way, and it might be bugs, it might be cold, might be the wind, but we've learned to tolerate it.
It might be the heat.
Might be the heat. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last few years we've had very hot weather. Uncomfortably hot, where you don't want to be in the tent until 11 o'clock at night, where the sun is low enough that it starts losing its intensity, and the tent's a sauna by 7 o'clock in the morning when the sun's back on it. But on the flip side, we had frozen water bottles 2 days later, so you can the temperature can range 20 degrees in a day. Yeah. So you just
that would be a lot of clothing and gear, that because you got a butt cover, you don't know how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and technology's improved that. It's easier to have good clothing for cold weather and light weather than maybe it used to be, right?
Yeah, rain gear is quite a bit lighter now than it used to be, and overall we've scaled back on the weight of gear, I would say. Brian's really taken the lead on that, but we both really cut back on the amount of stuff we bring with us. So.
Yeah, it's partly an age thing. You get older and you don't want to carry it all and look after it all and pack it all. Yep. The other big technology thing that's helped us in the north is we've been pretty early adopters of using pack boats. So we have a 17-foot canoe that folds up. It's a stick frame and a cover, and it basically fits in a hockey bag, and that makes it logistically easier to fly commercial to the north, and also fly in floatplanes or air charters that you don't have to take an external load like a canoe on the floats, or you can take a smaller plane because you don't have to put a canoe inside the airplane. So that's helped Jim and I as a 2-person team. We've also used them as a 6-person team, but it just opens up more airplane opportunities because it's easier now to land on wheels off strip on an esker or a beach than it is with a hard shell canoe, which is just a little more restrictive, a little more maybe costly to ship around.
Interesting idea.
Yeah.
I have heard of, who did we talk to? We talked to somebody, Darren, I think, who they actually took thwarts and whatnot apart so they could fit one canoe into another canoe. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about doing it, because otherwise they weren't going to be able to get enough canoes where they were going to in order to get it on the floats. So that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, a twin otter, you can fit three canoes stacked on top of one another in a twin, and we've traveled like that a number of times, and we've had, canoes strapped on floats on other trips. But I think by far we prefer the pack canoe, for a lot of reasons. One, it's fairly lightweight. If you're having to carry it, it's often the lightest piece of equipment that we have, and the logistics for getting it to and from the river is much easier than a hard shell.
But we've also, as you said, Tim, we've nested the canoes, taken the seats and the gunnels off, and stacked them either inside or stacked outside on a pontoon float, because it makes it easier to get more boats into or onto the plane.
And I would think it gives you more flexibility logistically to where you start and stop your trip. It doesn't have to be on a larger body of water that they have to, they can put down with the pontoons.
Yes.
Like you said, if there's a beach or something like that, you could do that.
Yep.
Cool. See, all these things.
Small things, though. It's hard to land on a float plane with a packed canoe and not start on shore. With a hard shell canoe, they can just drop the boat in the water and throw your stuff in and push you off and say, see you later. So,
and away you go. Yeah.
There are those small details you need to be aware of sometimes.
How long does it take you to reassemble it?
45 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe an hour 15, just depending. And, I don't know, what's your take, Brian?
Yeah, I'm thinking we're always done within an hour. Yeah, from start to finish. Sometimes we're a little more, I don't know, particular fussy, or the conditions aren't as well, right? If it's really windy or really buggy, or the site's not as comfortable, if the ground is not as good for just moving around, because you have to go from one side to the other side. And, but yeah, we've done it enough. It's always a little bit, we haven't done this in a year, what do we have to do? But it goes pretty easy. And it's certainly easier with two people. And I'm sure we can take it apart in half that time and roll it all up and have it packed away pretty quick.
So obviously with a trip like this, you guys are well prepared for, what if there's an emergency? What if somebody breaks an ankle? What if somebody... Or have you done? I'm assuming with the Forest Service, you may have done wilderness first aid training. And
yeah, it's been a while for me, but different first aid training. We try to bring a fairly comprehensive first aid kit that we've never actually needed, which is a good thing. And of course we have communication now more than we ever used to. Back in the day, it was, you had nothing. Paper maps, I'll pick you up at this spot in 3 weeks, and I hope you're going to get there. And now it's like, well, we could have almost real-time communication with, a clinic or a doctor or something if we got into an issue. So there's that, and that helps. But there's a certain amount of personal care, self-care that I think each of us carries onto the trail. We're very careful about what we're doing, so it's preventative. We don't let stuff happen to us and break a bone or hurt ourselves, so there's an element of caution that goes in with our planning.
Yeah, I think we brag that our trips are very uneventful, and there's not necessarily great stories to tell, because we try to live our life simple when we're up there and be success. And we want to be in nature on the land, seeing the wildlife, and we'd rather not deal with other issues that complicate things. Trauma, exactly.
Drama. We don't want our tent to blow down and have that be an issue, or our canoe blow away and have that be an issue, or run out of food, or any of the other number of things that could happen. So it's like we're fairly tight on routines and safety and the things we look out for to avoid those issues. Drama.
somewhat off topic, but you're talking about the wind. What's the landscape like in the areas that you tend to go to? Like, is it, are we talking like shrubs and like beyond the trees kind of a thing?
It's barren lands by and large. I mean, there's a few rivers where the trees follow the river for quite a way. You know, the Horton River is one, the Copper Mine is one where there's, you know, quite a few trees on the river. But for much of our trips, many of our trips, most of our trips, it's just barren land. It's tundra. And so the wind rules. There's nothing to slow the wind down. And, you know, and it can change within the day, you know, from being windbound with the wind from one direction to being windbound with the wind from another direction, and all in the same day.
And that is really good being barren lands because it opens up your visibility. You get out of the tent in the morning, if there's a wolf on a ridge, you're going to see it if it's, you know, a few meters away or even a kilometer or two away, because your visibility is great. So you don't miss as much wildlife opportunity. There's no forest or trees in the way. It makes portaging super easy from a, you know, you don't need a portage trail, right? You can get to a high point, literally stand on a rock and see where the next lake is and go, wow, we know where our target is. And then you just look for the easiest, driest, best footing. Which is super good. And it's, if you like to walk or hike every night on the land, it's just out the tent door or the kitchen shelter and just let's go to that rise and get to that rise, and where do you want to go next? And it's such a welcoming area of land to go on, provided that you're prepared for it and the conditions are good and you're okay being comfortable when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and what do you use for fuel then? So it's just scrub that you're able to gather, or how do you get campfire fuel?
We pretty much use white gas, you know, camp fuel. And, you know, there are other ways to do it for sure, but, you know, that's just what we've locked into. And so one of those logistical questions that you have to deal with is, well, how can you get white gas where you're going? You know, we know we can get it at, you know, one of the co-ops in Baker Lake, and one co-op charges twice as much as the other. So, you know, we know where to go. And, you know, Norman Wells, you know, we picked it up at, I forget, was it Northern Store or something?
Yeah, I think both stores had it. We've never really had much of a problem getting fuel. And Jim and I have just migrated to that. It's simple, it's fast, it's convenient, it's clean. But lots of people would use stick stoves now and you know, use little branches off the land. Typically where we are, there's limited firewood from a size perspective. You know, you're not going to get much wood that's much bigger than like kindling kind of stuff. But with a stick stove, you can cook fine. You know, stuff the size of your fingers or thumbs. Yeah, it's not that much different than canoe tripping down south in that perspective. We bring basically the same stuff. We just bring a little more warm clothing, and our trips are typically 3 weeks long ish. So, you know, we're packing more food, but and the other thing is, because there's no trees, you know, you're on the barren lands, and the wind can be an issue, but so can the heat and so can the bugs. But then you need some sort of, you know, tenting and maybe, you know, shelter like a tarp, kitchen protection, etc. that doesn't rely on trees. So something that's freestanding, or you can use your poles or your paddles for. Or last year we spent a lot of time with the canoe on edge because it was it just worked very well for us to give us some shelter when we wanted to get out of the wind and that. But yeah, no trees is an issue if you want to do a hammock, or if you want to use a traditional tarp and do a ridgeline or something. You know, we're always staking our tarp down and using paddles as poles to give it structure and that.
Yeah, and if you are looking for or hoping for an evening campfire,
No deal.
No deal. With a few exceptions. If you're along the coast, there's often more wood along the coast.
Oh,
But
like driftwood or something like that.
yeah, yeah. But also in the national park that we were in, there was no open fires allowed. So that's another aspect to be aware of. And, that you don't have to deal with back in the tree line generally.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned earlier, or sorry, alluded to the warmer. The last few years have been warmer. We're experiencing that here. We're in fire ban season like all the time now. So I actually have a flickering light so that I can plug it in the campfire, so that at least you get that feel, right?
Yeah, and of course the other thing in the Arctic is we typically have 24 hours of daylight. If we don't have 20 hours of daylight, we certainly have 24 hours of what we would consider daylight given the twilight. So you don't need a campfire for that aspect to, give you the ambience and have a nice, evening around.
And you don't need a headlamp either.
Yeah,
True.
Something we've never brought with us. And another common question we get is, well, gosh, that you're going pretty far north. Aren't you going to see northern lights? Well, no, it's light 24 hours. You can't see anything. You can't see the northern lights. So.
It's not dark enough to see the northern lights.
Yeah, and that also means you can get up whenever you want and paddle. Like you can beat the wind every morning if you want to get up at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning and start paddling. And if you get up to go to the bathroom during the night, you don't need a flashlight or a headlamp. You just walk out the tent door and it's bright enough. Right?
Yeah.
Does it affect your ability to sleep at night when it's not getting dark?
It doesn't affect Jim's and I ability to have a nap at 10 o'clock in the morning if we're windbound, and another nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon if we're still windbound.
Yeah, it's my favorite environment. The temperature's just right. It's either side of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and that the sun is warm but not often not too warm. There's good daylight. It's just my favorite environment.
With all that light, I would assume you guys are taking along some like a solar panel, and you just recharge all your electronics that way.
Yeah, we bring one solar panel and a battery bank, and we've had great success going back to. Since Jim and I started paddling together.
Has it been that long that we've been carrying electronics?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't.
Yeah, I certainly remember we had it. Yeah, I've been a pretty early adopter. I was doing my journal, I'm sure, in 2012 on an electronic device with a solar. Yeah, I certainly remember the Kujua and the was the other river we did on north of the Kujua, northeast of the Kujua? Nanook, yeah. We certainly were charging. Yeah. And the trick now is we bring I'd say a slightly bigger solar panel than we need. It's not big. It's a 28-watt solar panel, 30-watt solar panel, just because we can charge on overcast conditions in the Arctic without an issue to charge, an iPhone.
Yeah, same here. I think ours is 26 watts for what I drive around. Yeah, and a whatever 50,000 milliwatt or milliamp hour power bank or whatever, and it's enough to run all of ours.
Yeah, and I think we could go with certainly less, like half that solar panel if it was always sunny. But in the Arctic, you can easily get, you can get some, as we had last year, you can get some cold, windy, snowy days where Jim and I were basically doing half days portaging because we were on connecting the two rivers, which was about a 10-kilometer portage. So we were walking about a few hours every day and spending the rest of the day in the tent staying warm, which means we're reading books on our iPhones, and it's cold, so your battery life isn't as long, and you're using your phone more for being in the tent for journaling and doing books and stuff. So then you need to charge more, and of course you're in this bad charging weather. For us, it was slightly below zero and cloudy and snowy, and we had ocean fog every morning because I think we were within certainly 80 kilometers of the coast, so the fog would roll in. We had to wait for the fog to roll out before we really were keen to go out and do our portage. So a little bit bigger solar panel, we can charge during less than, ideal solar panel charging conditions. Yeah.
So you mentioned wildlife, Brian, and wolves. Are there examples of wildlife that you guys have encountered?
Well, we saw a grizzly bear at about a quarter mile last summer, and we because it's the barren lands, and there was some terrain as well. So you had, we were sort of in this bowl of a river valley, and up on the hillside we could see a brown shape, and we got just a little bit closer and could see that it was a grizzly bear, and I think it knew we were there, but it just kept doing what it was doing, and foraging on the hillside, and left us alone, and we left it alone, and sort of went our separate ways. But there were many caribou. This particular area, this national park, is home to the breeding area, or the calving area, of the blue nose caribou herd, and so we were seeing herds and herds of caribou, mainly cows with calves, some bulls. But at one point I was outside, had the wind in my ears, I couldn't really hear. Brian's in the tent, he's reading, and he said, "What's that noise?" I said, "Well, what noise? I can't I'm not hearing anything." There's something across the river. So I went and looked, and there was, I don't know, a couple hundred caribou, that were working their way along the shore of the river, and they grunt, and their heels or their legs make a clicking noise, and so there was all that kind of noise, associated with the caribou, and I wasn't hearing it at all, but Brian, could hear it in the tent. But yeah, got some nice video of that particular herd. Yeah,
over the years, we've seen, I think you could almost say, we've seen it all. But last summer we didn't see any sandhill cranes, which is really unusual. But we always see swans, we always see ptarmigan. We often see caribou and bear, whether that be grizzly or polar bear. We often see fox, hare, muskox. Last year wasn't a good year for wolves, but wolves are pretty common. And vary in terms of, whether we're seeing them, like we've had grizzly bears just down at the water, and we're just floating down the river, and we can
float right by them.
They don't even notice us. But other times you're backpiling on the river because there are so many caribou swimming in the river, or it's hard to get water because there's so much caribou hair in the river. You never know.
Yeah. On the Coppermine, we saw a number of moose, which that's pretty far north. But they were, followed the river, the Coppermine River, almost to the ocean. And at one point there was a calf that began swimming the river, and we were floating down to it, sort of inadvertently getting between, the calf and its mom, which was on the other shore. And Mom came in the water, and she was coming for us. And we had to do some sort of quick paddles to sort of get more space between us and the calf. And she came around and, sort of herded her calf towards the shore at that point. And, so it was a minor bit of excitement, but interesting interaction.
Always exciting when we see a wolverine, too, because they're pretty elusive for sights. And the other thing that I'm always taken by surprise, I think Jim a little less because of his professional background as a biologist, but when we get close to the ocean stuff, we start seeing signs of ocean wildlife. So we'll find a skull along the river, and it's from a seal. And I'm not instantly thinking seal, but Jim being a wildlife biologist is a little more adept sometimes to the where we are in terms of the habitat. And so it's always fun to see seals' heads poking out of the water and that kind of stuff on trips. And fish species change too when you get farther north and closer to the ocean stuff as well. And so it's.
And do you fish on your trips?
I like to fish. This particular summer, fishing wasn't great. I caught a few grayling, and because of some of our travel schedule, I didn't fish the couple of lakes that we were on. It just wasn't working out for how each day was unfolding. But there's probably lake trout. But on other rivers, we've where there's been some lakes and better rapids, the fishing can be unbelievable. I mean, you're catching some just amazingly large lake trout, and the fishing is very fast as well. And but I love fishing. If I catch nothing, I'm okay with that. It's just we'd never rely on fish because I've been disappointed too many times to count on fish. And,
You and me both.
yeah. It's like, well, I'm gonna pack less food and plan on catching fish. Well, no, that never happens. That never works.
That's the drama that Jim and I like to avoid. Running out of food.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm starving. Do a better job at fishing.
Yeah. Right.
So what's coming up this year for you guys? Around 2026, I guess.
We are always thinking of something, and we're not always fast to make a decision. But we have our eye on a fairly straightforward, easy river trip in the Central Barrens. We kind of like the more Central Barrens more so than the mountainous stuff. In the last few years, we've been pretty far north. We've had great success with being right along basically the Northwest Passage for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's just time to maybe go somewhere else. And
yeah, I think we're trying to avoid the 10-kilometer portage again. That was my thinking. It's like, well, maybe we can find somewhere that's just a little bit easier than what we did last summer, and I'm okay with that. The river.
Over the years, we haven't been hesitant to try to do something a little unique, and we've done a lot of very classic river trips, paddle the Thelon or the Kazan or whatever, but the Coppermine. But we also tried to do some, a little more unique stuff. And last summer was a good example. We connected two rivers that, to our knowledge, people have never connected, and then we paddled more of the rivers all the way out to the ocean, and we paddled the ocean to get to the nearest community. So we like doing something a little unique and adding to that, the knowledge that's out there for future paddlers. And the North is so interconnected. I always try not to lose sleep over things, because when you get there, it's always pretty obvious that you can just get from one body of water to the next body of water if you're willing to do a bit of work. And last summer we did a bit of work on a couple occasions.
Well, yeah, I looked at your map on your website and just went, wow, that's wicked. That's amazing. All the places you guys have been. It just like,
yeah,
I'm not of the 10-kilometer portage that I can do without that, but I'm jealous of the amount of wild nature. Like, do you run into? So if you're trying to save some money on a flight or whatever, so we book with other people outside of that, do you run into other people on your trips?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. There are some of the rivers, like the Coppermine, that get paddled by many other groups every year. And we ran into, on the Coppermine, 2 groups from Minnesota, from a YMCA camp outside of Ely. And, so that's fairly common. I've run into groups from the same camp on, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 other trips. And, we've run into certainly Inuit people out on the land, that they're boating out and camping, hunting and fishing. And, that's always fun to talk with them. And trying to think who else.
We've run into, I guess, over the years, a few, European travelers that would seek the Northern Canadian and other Canadian, paddlers as well, or American paddlers. Some years we know we have friends just ahead of us or just behind us or on the next river over or something. Sometimes when you fly in, you can ask the air charter company or the pilots, like, hey, are we the first group this year? Is anybody ahead of us or behind us? But some places we go, we know we're the only paddlers that year, or for the next, couple years, or the last, few years, there just hasn't been people paddling in that area.
Yeah, some of our routes are pretty obscure. They're not well known by people looking to do a river like the Kazan or Thilan. Those are fairly straightforward, well-known rivers, but like our trip from Parker Lake to Rankin Inlet was, I don't know, I imagine people have done that trip. Brian might know them, I don't, but there was nobody else on the river, on those rivers that summer in that area. And so.
Yeah, and some trips certainly have outfitters. Like, we were on the Horton, and the Horton's a pretty popular river for, you can sign up with a canoe outfit company and they'll take you down the river.
And so do you document your travels just for yourselves, or is there a book in the works, or is there a documentary coming?
Well, both Brian and I journal. We keep journals, so there's material, written in the written word. I do some writing. I've done some radio work for our local community radio station, and have interviewed people like Brian and other friends. There was a period where I was, producing something once a month or so, and so some of that, my material would make it into those radio bits. And but Brian and I have been doing presentations at like the Far North Symposium and the Wilderness Canoe Symposium. Brian will be presenting there this coming year, and we'll be presenting in Minneapolis as well in the coming year. So that material makes it into those places as well, those outlets.
Awesome. We'll have to make a trip to the symposiums.
Okay. I could probably get talked into.
The
only other thing we could just briefly touch on is the fact that if you want to expand, beyond your local paddling area, or even just go on bigger trips, even if you're staying in Ontario, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's lots of resources out there in terms of joining a paddling organization, taking a course, using social media or old school networks to expand the people you're paddling with in terms of skills and experience and diversities, and that kind of. Jim and I have spent a long time getting to where we are, but there are means to accelerate that gaining experience, right? And paddling within your limits, judgment goes a long ways, sometimes more so than skill can go, but skill can also help out.
Yeah, don't be afraid to learn from others, and to realize that you might not know it all. I think that's a very real trap to fall into. It's like, well, I've paddled in the boundary waters for many years, I know it all, and you wind up on a big Arctic river, and you can be humbled very quickly. And so go into it with your eyes open and your ears open, especially to learn from others.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I would echo that I have logged, a boatload of paddling time. I thought I was a pretty good paddler, and then I tried whitewater, went, I know nothing.
Yeah, it's a big, vast world, right? There's a lot of diversity to it in terms of even paddle craft, right? But be adaptable, be flexible, and one of the things I love about paddling is that there's many different ways of doing things, and they're not necessarily right or wrong. They're just different. So, like we mentioned that Jim and I travel and we use a stove, but you could easily travel and use a stick stove and not a fuel-based stove. And there's many ways of doing things, which is really good. I've certainly learned lots of things over the years, and I'm still learning things. And sometimes it's kind of like, wow, like I never thought of that, but it works. Maybe it's not the way I want to do things, but it certainly works.
Well, that's where somebody we talked to recently was saying that, because you said about the discomfort and just that you can live with discomfort. You're not going to die from being uncomfortable. So
yeah, exactly.
Putting yourself in those situations, you learn what you can build your resilience, and you learn what you can deal with.
Yeah, and it gets you out of, like, we all think in a certain way, but different from each other. So watching somebody else do something, or just listening to somebody else talk about how they do something, it's like, oh, that could be, maybe I'll try that just to see.
And push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Being uncomfortable can also save your life. So I'm a big fan of, I'm comfortable being chilled for a long time because I don't want to get sweaty and moisture, because the sweat and the moisture will kill you faster than being chilled will. So it's not always a bad thing.
Oh no, I'm all for being cool. I sweat at the drop of a hat.
Well, you're perfect, as Jim says. It's perfect, comfortable temperature when you're paddling north of 60.
All right.
Awesome. I think that's it for us. All right, that's it for us for today. Thank you so much to Jim and Brian for joining us and telling us about their adventures in the tundra. And we would love to hear from you if you want to talk to us anytime. We are at hi@supergoodcamping.com. That's hi@supergoodcamping.com. And you can find us on all the social media. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.